getting fall out here. It's getting cold, and we're going to the land of gold. We're going to do a travelogue on probably the greatest, most exciting, most written about, and romanticized gold rush in history. It was named after a river in the Yukon called the Klondike. And it was just a great adventurous thing, and a lot of hardship too. And just to get us in the mood here, I would like to recite parts of a very popular poem written about 100 or 150 years ago about the Klondike Gold Rush and the land up there and the cold up there. And it was about a fellow who agreed to bury or cremate his friend in the cold weather up there, and everything was ice cold, snow and everything frozen. And it goes along these lines. There are strange things done in the land of the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was the night on the marge of Loch Labarge. I cremated Sam McGee. I'll just read you or recite you the beginning part of the poem, and it's a fairly long poem, and then I'll just come back and show you how he closes the poem off. But it kind of depicts the life of the gold rush up there at that time, which was about 1898. Now Sam McGee was from Tennessee, where the cotton blooms and blows. Why he left his home in the South to roam round the pole, God only knows. He was always cold, but the land of gold seemed to hold him like a spell, though he'd often say, in his homely way, that he'd sooner live in hell. 'Twas on a Christmas day we were mushing our way o'er the Dawson Trail. Talk of your cold through the parka fold, it stabbed like a driven nail. If our eyes we'd close, then the eyelids froze, till hardly we couldn't see, and it wasn't much fun, but the only one to whimper was Sam McGee. Now, as I said, the poem goes on, and as they mush over the trail, during the trip, Sam McGee dies, and his friend had promised to see that he was looked after and just not left out in the open, in the cold, and the frozen ground. So he goes along for several more days, and he comes to a lake, and the water's all frozen over, and there's a frozen old boat at the edge of the lake, a derelict. And it was an old steam engine, and it had a furnace in it. And he said, you know, I'm going to bury my friend, not bury him, but I'm going to cremate him. So he got a wood chopped and built a fire, and he stuffed in Sam McGee. And he waited for the cremation process to occur, and black smoke started to belch out of the old boat, and he got deathly afraid. And he says, and he ends the poem up there, and he says, I was filled with dread, but bravely I said, I'll just take a peep inside. I guess he's cooked, and it's time I looked, and the door I opened wide. And there sat Sam, looking cool and calm, in the heart of the furnace roar, and he wore a smile that you could see a mile, and he said, please close that door. For it's fine in here, but I greatly fear that you'll let in the cold and the storm. And since I left Plumtree down in Tennessee, this is the first time I've been warm. You know, I'm not going to keep this winter hat on all the time, even though a lot of it was winter, but the gold rush went through winter and summer up there for a year or two. And but they weren't there to fight the cold. People were there to find the gold. So what I'm going to do is change hats. I'm getting rid of this winter hat, and I'm going to put on my gold mining hat, the one that I do the digging and working that gold pan, looking for gold. Okay, let's go and look at some pictures now of and I'm going to show you in this travelogue one of the most popular photographs ever taken of the whole Klondike Gold Rush. And but we'll look at some more too. They're old black and white photos. Just for orientation, you might see this diagram of a map in some of the other travelogues on the Klondike. But let's just start at the bottom, because when we talk about the Klondike, we often mention these places along the route to the Klondike. You can see in the bottom, a lot of people, mostly Americans, started from Seattle and made their way north along the Brown Line up to Dawson City at the top in the north, which was in the Yukon, Canada. And that's where the Klondike Gold Rush occurred. Now, just going back down to the bottom of the map, the Seattle starting point, they went by boat up along the coast of the Pacific Ocean, and they went past Prince Rupert and past Juneau, which is the capital of Alaska, and their jumping off point from the ships was at Skagway. And at Skagway, they climbed over the mountains and they crossed the American-Canadian border. You can see it there in the red line. And they came down to the Yukon River, which was at Whitehorse. And they followed the Yukon River downstream all the way to Dawson. Now, if you look on a regular map, you'll see the Pacific Ocean out on the left there to the west. And notice it says there in black, to Anchorage. The continent swings really to the left or westward and goes to communities further along in Alaska, like those at Anchorage and inland at Fairbanks. Okay, but again, the Klondikers started in Seattle and made their way north along the coast. Skagway was a big jumping off point, through Whitehorse, and finally to the Klondike, which was near Dawson City in the Yukon in Canada. They were crazy for the gold. If they didn't find gold, they hoped for adventure. Most were Americans who came up the coast from Seattle to Dia, on the Chilkoot Trail, which is on the left, or to Skagway, which is the White Pass Trail on the right. Both routes went north to Canada and the gold discovery on the Klondike River, which was a tributary of the Yukon River. Both these routes joined into one down the Yukon River to Dawson City, where the adventurers hoped to find the gold they dreamed about. People today, like those gold seekers back in 1898, take a boat from Seattle or Vancouver to Skagway. Or they can also drive up to Skagway and to Dawson City overland through Canada by road. Big cruise ships make Skagway a stopover. Some cruise ships continue westward on to Anchorage, and others make the return trip back home. While in Skagway, many tourists take the train right up the White Pass and across the Canadian border, with chances to look down at the original trail of 1898. Winter or spring, it was tent accommodations only. From Dia, horses pulled supplies on the lower slopes, but the steepness of the Dia slope really made it mandatory that backpacking became the only way. This is the most celebrated photograph of the Klondike Gold Rush, and it is the climb that is out of Dia. People carried their own supplies and or hired Tlingit Indian packers, both men and women. It was a hurried and frenzied situation, and the packers worked for the highest payer. There was no loyalty whatsoever to stay with the same person you were working for, and changing employers in mid-trail was common. This, of course, left people on the trail unable to move their supplies and created considerable tension and chaos. But that was the situation. After some Tlingit packers were paid in worthless U.S. Confederate money, they quickly learned to accept no folding money. It had to be payment in gold or silver coin, or go carry your own stuff. No less than 22,000 gold seekers were registered to enter Canada by the Canadian Northwest Mounted Police in the first year alone. The amount of supplies carried in was tremendous. Theft was common. People carried their supplies up the trail and dropped them off. They then walked and slid down the hillsides to get more of their supplies and returned to their pile of goods already placed along the trail further along. They often discovered that their supplies left on the trail had been stolen or sold to another traveler. On the Canadian side of the border, punishment usually was in the form of being turned back to the U.S. side or to suffer a brief lashing. Court was held in a tent and trials were brief affairs. With the law and order presence of the Canadian Northwest Mounted Police and then the urgency to get to the goldfields, there was relatively little time spent on either petty crimes or the legal processing of them. We've got more travelogues on the Klondike and other topics where we're going to, but I do want to acknowledge the poet of that Sam McGee poem that I recited at the beginning. His name is Robert Service, and in my view, he's one of the great poets. Really, he's my favorite poet. He's got many more poems, and they're all really, they tell a story. He's got several volumes like this book that I've got here. I bought several of them, more than one of these big books of his. He's got The Spell of the Yukon. He's got a whole variety of poems there. Ballads of the Chico is another section. Rhymes of the Rolling Stone and Rhymes of the Red Cross Man. He was in World War I, I think, and involved there. He was also a teller at the bank in Whitehorse, and he helped people get through the Miles Canyon rapids. So he was a variety kind of a guy, but he was, above all, he was a poet. The Rhymes of the Red Cross Man are war-oriented poems, but he's got many more of the ones of the Klondike. Barroom Ballads is a whole other section, and they're just all great poems. Robert Service, look him up on the internet or at your library. You'll get a lot of enjoyment if you're like me. You'll get a lot of enjoyment out of his poems. And so, okay, hit the thumbs up and the subscribe button, and we can bring you more of these Klondike travelogues, but we're going to other places as well. Okay, we'll see you down the road.